Okay, we're recording. All right, cool. All right. Welcome, everybody, to our final lunchbox of the semester. We will have these again next semester. And if you have any great ideas about something you'd like to present on, we send out a call for presentations soon. I don't know when that will happen.
Soon.
Yeah,
right after Thanksgiving.
And so, yeah, so right after Thanksgiving. Good. That's a good timing. So thank you so much for coming. These sessions are a collaboration between the Outreach School and the Alabama Center for Teaching and Learning, and so that we can get people in here to give us really great ideas for how to teach and how we might be innovative in our teaching and just effective in our teaching, really. So we're really excited today because we had this presentation at Evolution and it was fabulous. So if you missed Evolution, you're in good shape. You're lucky because you're going to get to see this today. And I think they will just. Is there anything else I should say? Okay, I'm going to let you take it away then.
Sure. All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for coming.
Oh, you can introduce yourself.
I'm just going to talk at you and not tell you where. No, no, thank you so much for coming today. I'm really excited about this topic. My name is Biehle, and I'm a clinical assistant professor of pharmacy practice within the School of Pharmacy. So this is my 4th year at UW in the School of Pharmacy, and over that time, I've really developed a passion for game-based learning as an innovative form of student engagement. So we can do a whole talk, you can do hours on the abstract benefits of interactive or active learning and game-based learning, but my goal today is really to give you some tools and some resources to where you could go back to your class and implement a game today, an interactive game, and discuss the pearls and pitfalls of creating a game and making it effective. Some other questions that I'm hoping to answer today, and if I don't, please let me know, but some other questions I'm hoping to answer are, why should we do a game? Is there data supporting this? And then, what are some examples and design elements of games? So that's what we're kind of going for. Please feel free to stop me as we go along. I'll do a presentation, and then I have some discussion questions afterwards as well. Right. All right. So again, today we're going to talk about game-based learning in the higher education setting, examples of games, including interprofessional education, and then pearls and pitfalls. You'll notice that I am focusing on health sciences education, and part of that is because that's my field, but also because that's actually the most popular area for game-based learning right now. So we have the most data for it coming out of that field. So that's kind of where my focus is going to be, but I think that you could apply these principles to any field. We know that our adult learners are a few things. We know they're self-directed, they're motivated, and they really want to be actively involved in participating. They're problem-centered, and they may enjoy learning about things that are not practical and useful, but what they really want to take away from a lecture are the practical, useful things that they can go and apply towards this topic. So who in here, I'm just curious, has included game-based learning as part of a lecture? Anybody? All right, some. Has anybody done Jeopardy? Yeah, that's a fave, right? So we're going to talk about specifics as we go along, but I know Jeopardy is one of the most popular ones, and there's certainly a lot of nice templates online for that. But it's great to know, it looks like a little over half have included a game as part of their lecture. Again, health professions education is the most popular subject area for learning games or serious games. And actually, they've taken this a step further in my field. So the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, which is our largest education body through pharmacy, is now recommending development of serious games as part of pharmacy education. And they're kind of taking that from medical education, which is also a huge area currently for game-based learning. So it's kind of exciting that they're taking notice of this, and so this has also made all of us as pharmacy faculty take notice of game-based learning and how to make it effective. Games can be defined as the use of game principles for learning, skill acquisition, and training. It's also an instructional method that requires competitive activity as well as preset rules. Really, games can be used at any time during class. They could be used as the beginning as kind of a way to focus everybody in on the material. They could be used during class as a teaching tool. But where I find them most effective is at the end of class as really revision and application of concepts. So that's really where I tend to focus my games and my lectures. So why should we play to learn? We know there are a lot of benefits to students, and we'll talk about those, but there are also so many benefits for teachers. I think probably the biggest one is faculty creativity and innovation. So it really allows us to take what we enjoy and put it into a lecture. So if there's a game show that you really like, you can find a way to include it. Or if there is a board game that you like, you can find a way to include that too. And what I think is neat is when your students see that you're comfortable with that, they will model that as well. So for example, on my rotation this month, my students, I have 3 students with me, and one of them did Potassium Candyland. Another one did Diabetic Ketoacidosis Jenga. And then we've also had things like Farkle, the dice game, as anemia, and we did anemia bingo too. So they'll really model, once they see your creativity and how you design a game and how it can be effective, they can take that on as well. So that's pretty exciting. It also increases your interaction with students just naturally. They're going to be more interactive with you. It'll increase motivation. And one of my favorite things about game-based learning is that it really helps with time on task. So we know that time on task can be a great component of showing how effective learning is going. And really a game requires students to be immersed in the topic. And so that can really help with your amount of time on task. It's been shown that game-based learning can be effective across all 3 domains, but I'm mostly going to be focusing on the cognitive and affective domains of our learners. So in the cognitive domain, it can help with peer learning and teaching. So they're going to be learning and teaching from one another, help with problem solving, critical thinking. And one of the best things about games is that really gives them immediate feedback. So especially if it's a game that they can play independently, they're going to get the answer right in front of them. And really the game isn't going to get tired of answering questions or anything like that. It's just going to keep giving them that immediate feedback. It also requires them to recall or have past experiences applied to the game in some scenarios, depending on how you design it. And then they're all situation-based or problem-centered. And of course, with the big focus that we've had on problem-based learning and team-based learning, I think game-based learning really fits nicely within that. Across the affective domain, it's really engaging, it's exciting, it's enjoyable. One of the things I've noticed is that students just really like that it's different. We're doing something really different in the lecture time. Another thing is that one of my concerns when I started doing, I did a game and we'll talk about it, Survivor Sepsis, was how stressful it would be if students are off the island. Would that stress them out in front of their peers? But really, because the game, especially if you set it up this way, is a less stressful environment for learning, I found that they're more likely to ask you questions or ask each other questions than to raise their hand in class in the setting of like a traditional lecture, for example, because everyone's participating and it's less high stakes, if you will. It also helps with teamwork and can increase motivation, and then of course communication. It's not perfect, however. There are definitely some things to consider with game-based learning. If you make it too complex or your directions are really specific, it can be very confusing or distracting. So it can kind of take away from the information that you're trying to teach them and really kind of focusing on directions this person moves this many spaces and things like that can get too confusing. Rewards are controversial, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. But if, for example, there's been data on this in, say, like the high school setting where, for example, they'll say that you can have 2 extra points on a quiz if your team wins. Well, for a student who's not doing well, that could be huge. And so there could be a lot of emotions around, being disappointed or too competitive or things like that. So while rewards can be beneficial or extrinsic rewards can be beneficial, they can also be pretty controversial. One thing that's also I've definitely found in trialing some of these games is that your class will tune out if not all participants are involved. So, for example, I have some small group games like Family Feud, for example, and there's only a few students in the 50 plus students in the class can participate, then the ones who are not participating are not really going to pay attention. If they have to know what the person said before them in order to be successful in the game, they're more likely to participate. But overall, if you just have a small percentage of the class participating, the rest of them are really going to lose focus or, in the case of pharmacy, leave, potentially leave class. So it's really important to have as many participants and a nice balance of participants involved. If you have a really large class, you may need the help of additional facilitators. That might be students facilitating, that may, maybe if you have assistants, things like that. But in some cases, so once you put in the time, it's kind of similar to any lecture that we do. Once you put in the time, you can really just some of them are expensive. We're going to talk about games that are free, all the way to those that were really expensive and made by video game designer people. But cost could be a consideration. And then, of course, our precious lecture time. So, it's really sometimes it's really difficult to incorporate everything we want to within the time that we have. So you have to really balance that with the games you want to do with the instruction for it. Some feedback from our learners have included a few things. Responsibility, the fact that when they make a mistake, they immediately see the results of that mistake and they can remember it. That also goes along with that immediate feedback. So they kind of compete with themselves because they really want to get it right and really want to, get to whatever the end goal is of the game. And then it also has increases their focus because it makes them feel really confident about what they know, or certainly highlights areas that they need to improve. These are the type of games we're going to talk about today as far as specific examples. Everything from crossword puzzles to web-based and applications. And so there's certainly more examples than what I'm going to talk about today, but these are ones that have been studied in health science education or ones that I have done in my classes. And so I just wanted to give you a wide variety of specific examples that you could take back. The first one looked at board games. So this was a class of 128 students, where the students were responsible for doing case studies as well as designing games. They designed everything from Trivial Pursuit to Premium to Monopoly, and then they were assessed via a survey. So students strongly agreed that the games reviewed lecture topics and engaged them in the topics. All of them felt it increased their knowledge base and was beneficial to learning. And most of them felt that it increased their test scores in the corresponding course. There we go. Okay. This was one very specific to pharmacy, but I really think you could do it with just about anything. This was the race to glucose. And there were 47 pharmacy students who had to roll the dice to move the game pieces along the gluconeogenesis pathway. So they started at glutamate, ended at glucose, and they had to respond to quiz questions along the way. So overall, most of them felt it was fun, 83%. A lot of them felt that it improved the understanding of content and felt it was worthwhile. But less than half of them felt it helped perform better on the assessment. So for this one, we think that it was really fun, but not sure how well it improved performance on games. The reason I wanted to include this one too is because it's kind of like Potassium Candyland. The student kind of designed that one the same way, and that you just answer questions along the way in order to move your game piece. And so I really think that this one was specific to glucose, but you could use it in just about any subject that you're trying to quiz your students on. This was one of my favorites from last year. This was one of our Find Each Other games. This was Where in the World Does Carmen STD Go? And so I have the privilege of teaching the sexually transmitted infections lecture in the School of Pharmacy. And so I had them find each other based on descriptors about the sexually transmitted infection. So for example, Each student would get the description of the STD in a city. So this infection is often screened for using RPR in Tokyo. And so that's syphilis. And so they would all go find their groups. Using the clues that they had, they would have to determine which disease state they are and then answer questions related to that infection. So then the first group to complete the cases wins. Then we review all of the questions as a class. I did a similar idea with the Fungus Amongus game, and so this was in the invasive fungal infections lecture, where each student has a one-liner description of a fungal infection. Then they have to go find their groups and answer cases related to their fungus. And again, we then all discuss the cases as well. Any questions so far? Great. One that was published that I would love to try that I haven't done yet is pharmacy scene investigation based on crime scene investigation or CSI. So the students are divided into groups and 2 members are acting as lead detectives. And basically the students have to start from the end. So there's been a murder of something where someone has been found dead and the case is related to a drug-drug interaction or an adverse drug reaction or a side effect. And so the students have to work with their detective to go back and see what medications was the patient on and what disease states they had and things like that in order to try to solve the mystery of what happened. So I think that one sounds really fun. I just haven't done it yet. Similarly, other pharmacy education published Clue. And so in this case, students have to, again, answer questions as they go along. And that's how they get things like they find out who the murderer was, the weapon, the location. And whichever group can answer the most questions correctly, that group successfully completes the game. Game show based are another one of my personal favorites because students, they watch game shows. And although I did have a couple of my medical residents who didn't know what Family Feud was, and that was really sad, but most of them know what the game shows are. So this one was Survivor Sepsis, and this is a play on the name of the guideline, which is called Surviving Sepsis. And so in this one, I divided the class into 4 teams, and they passed around a buzzer. And so the individual has to answer questions for their whole team. And so they pass the buzzer along, and then if they have an incorrect answer, their team is off the island, and the question will go to the next team. And so we kind of go around like that. And so that way, it's still individuals answering the question, but they are answering them for their entire team to be kept on the island. Like I was saying earlier, Family Feud is one of my faves. This was oral anticoagulant Family Feud. And so in this one, and the next one are really good for small groups. So I wouldn't recommend these with large groups, but they're really good with small ones. So with Family Feud, you would divide your small group into 2 teams. Each team has a buzzer. And just like in Family Feud, one person from each team will go first and has to answer a question. And whoever answers it the fastest, that team gets to decide to pass or play based on the category. And then each individual on the team has to answer several questions. And so the team that ends up with the highest score wins. And so as you go along, of course, when they're answering questions, you're just reinforcing whichever concepts you want to reinforce. Obesity management catchphrase was another one of my faves. And you can really do a catchphrase for just about anything. I got the idea from, I don't know if there are any fans of Jimmy Fallon here, of his show, but he does catchphrase, and he made it to where all you do is you use the catchphrase buzzer, but you can really make it about anything because you make your own cards that have the clues on them. So again, this is the other one that's good for small groups. So you have 2 teams that are made up of every other person, and they're trying to get their teammates to guess the phrase on the card. And so we'll talk about a little bit later. I have some examples of how I would maybe do catchphrase based on this talk. And so you can just kind of see of how we would do that. And then they pass around the buzzer, and the buzzer is beeping. I don't know if you guys have the catchphrase, but the buzzer is beeping down to the time. And so when the buzzer goes off, the team holding it loses. So there's kind of a constant competition going on and a lot of great interaction. This is one that was published, and this would be one that was good for our medicinal chemistry professors. So in this case, this was Who Wants to Be a MedChem Millionaire, where teams ring a bell or a buzzer to answer questions projected on the screen. And then those with the most MedChem moolah win. This is one of my favorites for experiential education. I'm not sure if any of you take students on rotation with you, but I take 3 students at a time for 8 weeks at a time. And so they're with me all day, and that's in their last year of pharmacy school. So if you've ever had to do any drug information questions, they can be slightly dry, but this is a big part of pharmacy. So for example, if my provider asks, hey, can I use, this anticoagulant in this patient's blood clot when they have this condition? So then we have to go do a search of the literature to see that. Okay. So while that can be kind of dry, I try to spice it up a little bit with some competition. So I have my 3 students sit at their computers, and then I just give them an abbreviation of a landmark trial. So say there's a famous trial called the Nice Sugar Trial. I don't tell them, but that's what I use every year. But it's the Nice Sugar Trial. And so then they have to race to pull up the full PDF of the article. And so after that, it's a great chance for us to debrief and discuss search strategies, because there's a lot of ways that you can get to that answer, but I can give them some tips and tricks on how I would recommend they get to that answer. So that's an example of one that I do on the experiential side. Card games, I think you were mentioning card games earlier, right, before we started?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they studied card games in medicine. This was cardiology Go Fish and infectious disease Gin Rummy. And so 45 students played the game for an hour on 3 occasions over 6 weeks and had a pre and post assessment. The cardiology and infectious disease assessment scores significantly improved after the game. All of them indicated that it made them think about the relationship between pathogens and antimicrobials or bugs and drugs in a new way. And almost all of them indicated that it made them think about cardiac pharmacology in a new way. One thing I really liked about this study is that they evaluated the VARC learning preference, and all of them learned from participating regardless of their preference, but the kinetic learning improved the most. So I thought that was kind of an interesting piece of data. You could also do a whole talk on assignment games, so the use of YouTube submissions, Wordle, and Instagram and Twitter. I just wanted to touch on it because I do think it's a way that you can incorporate games into your talks. So one of them that I can think of is YouTube submissions. So for example, in pharmacy, how we would use this is we have a lot of focus on communication with patients and communications with providers. And so for example, having students submit the best counseling experience with a patient or their best experience in talking to an angry provider or something like that. And so then having them upload those to YouTube for review, and then whoever has the best one wins. Is anyone familiar with Wordle? Okay, good. So most people are. Yeah, so Wordle is also one that you could do for, maybe who comes up with the best Wordle on a certain topic. The one on the bottom here, this is one that I have, all I did with this one is I took my student evaluations and threw them into a word cloud. And I thought it was really cool because the biggest things that came out were patients and students, so that was really nice. And then this one at the top is one where someone put in their CV. And so there's research and model and things like that. But the way I could see you using this as a game is, again, assigning a topic and then having students create the best word cloud, and then they have a whole variety of shapes that they can choose from as well. Hashtags on Instagram and Twitter. One that I really wanted to do with my students that are here during flu season, they're with me on flu season, is I wanted them to find the best flu advertisements because they're everywhere. And then they could just hashtag it like Biehle flu rotation or something like that. And then I could easily find it on Instagram. I do have an Instagram for infectious disease pharmacy. There are a couple of us out there that have that. But certainly it's a nice way where, again, like for my example with flu, they would just have to find the best one, and then we could review all of them that way by just submitting them via hashtags. This is an example of a free game, which is great. These are crossword puzzles, and they were created and administered in lectures in pharmacology and medicinal chemistry. The clues in the puzzle then correlated with the learning objectives. And what I thought was really neat about what they mentioned with crossword puzzles is that crossword puzzles are self-correcting. So the students literally cannot put in the wrong answer, which is kind of cool. And so when they were assessed, over 90% of them indicated that the puzzles enhanced their learning, oriented them to important topics, and served as good reviews. So one of the questions that came up during the Evolution conference was which types of games could be used for, say, online, based courses. And I think this would be an example of one. It's just because it doesn't require some of the finding each other and things like that, like the other games do. There are a ton of web and application-based games, and I think these are just going to increase. So for your field, I'm sure there are a ton of them. A few that I thought were really creative were the ones that were just kind of creative. So Septris, which is sepsis, but it's in Tetris. So you have to make decisions for the patient before they hit the bottom. So I thought that was kind of neat. It's kind of neat, too, because some of our large professional organizations have really grasped these concepts. So Euro Challenge is actually by the American Urology Association. So it's a game that's produced by them to reinforce their own guidelines for, say, future urologists who are studying it. So I think it's pretty neat. And then one other example is the Heart Sound Challenge, where usually medical students listen in to these heart sounds and however many they can get right in a row, and then they win the game. This is probably the most costly example of a game, but it was good that they studied it. So this was adventure game learning versus conventional learning. And again, this was by urologists, so they are really into this, which is great. But this was teaching microscopy urinalysis. So in this example, 145 medical students were divided into either learning by this, you can't really see it because of me, but this educational adventure game, Euro Island, versus text-based conventional training. So they assessed learning outcomes with a test as well as a questionnaire. And what they found is there was a statistical significant increase in the game-based test average versus the conventional group, as well as attitudes were significantly more positive with the game-based group. The other thing that I thought was neat about this example is that they mentioned that they use resources within their own school on campus. So they used their information technology department, as well as they had a course in video game design. And so it was made a project for those students that really kind of helped each other in creating this game. The other thing we need to know is if students enjoy these games. So in 217 medical students from 2 different schools, almost all of them liked the idea of using technology to enhance healthcare education. They felt that education should make better use of new technologies. They think that video games can have educational value. And 97% of them said that they would try them if they were fun. So we certainly know that students are open to these games. So I was curious, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in kind of our discussion section, but which types of game-based learning have you guys included in your lectures? Anything similar to what we've talked about? Anything different? What do you guys think?
Yeah, we do some similar, some very simple games. Just I have a virus game that is it's literally a type of trivia where we actually look at current and historical events and then just try to place it with what virus family, and then what's the route of transmission. And so it's honestly a really simple game, but it's extremely effective and definitely something that students really enjoy. All the way to I actually have a group of prior students right now who have taken a subgroup of my students by just volunteering, and they're actually using very expensive games that they happen to have that they're integrating micro-curriculum into, and it's an optional activity for a group of students, but I offer a lot of optional activities, and so that's one that they could choose. And so it's the gaming group. And, so a ton of the things that you mentioned, it's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else have similar different ones?
I've used it just really simple for teaching anatomical directions,
Yeah.
Simon Says.
Oh, that's so cute.
That was with the class of like 70, so we could all do it together.
That's great. That's a really good one. And again, I love the ones that students already kind of have an idea of what the rules are. Like what Simon says, they hopefully pretty much know. And so you don't have to be as, necessarily explicit in your instructions. So that's great. Any other examples?
Jeopardy.
Jeopardy! Yes. Love it. Classic.
Battleship.
Battleship? How do you use Battleship?
I teach Spanish, so the grid is like the person, and the other axis is a verb, so they have to conjugate the verb correctly to shoot the square.
Oh, that's great. That's really neat. I love hearing these different ideas. And when I was at Evolution, somebody mentioned the fishbowl game. I don't know if you guys have ever played that, but there's 3 rounds. Everybody puts in words into a fishbowl, and so in this case, the teacher would. And then students are in groups, and so for the first round, it's like catchphrase, where they can say anything to get their group to guess the word. The second round is charades, and then the third round, they can only say one word. But it's the words that they use are going to be changed up. So I thought that was kind of fun because it's a 3-parter as well, and it gets them moving and talking and all those different things. So, any other ones? Yeah.
I actually designed my online class around game principles.
Great.
So the whole class is not a game exactly, but it's all using a lot of game principles, so it's kind of complex.
Absolutely. That's really neat.
Levels instead of weeks.
There you go.
It has levels instead of weeks.
Absolutely. Makes it, yeah, a little bit different. That's awesome. Thank you, guys. So in designing an educational game, we really want to define outcomes and objectives. We want to have clear instructions. And then it's going to be important to balance entertainment and education. So one of the biggest things is difficulty. So if you make a game that's too challenging with the material too maybe, granular, then students are going to get bored. And they may even get discouraged. If it's too easy, again, they may not feel like they're getting enough out of it and may get bored. So there's really that balance, and I feel like that's usually kind of determined which questions are too easy or too hard after a trial run. But that's one of the things that's important to balance. And then the other thing is group size. So again, some of these really lend themselves better to smaller groups versus really large groups. It's also really important to have timely feedback. So when you're having students go through the game, instead of just an answer, I usually have like a nice explanation that is ready to go for them, no matter what game it is. And then as we're going to talk about, assessment is huge, and so modifying it based on student feedback. So for example, for the catchphrase game, in one of them, the first time I did catchphrase, you could see the word through the back of the piece of paper, and I was like, well, that's something I got to modify for next year. And so now I've modified that since. But that's just one example of ways you can modify it. Some pearls, again, moderate difficulty. The rules do encourage creativity and critical thinking. But you don't have to be too hard or too easy. Timely feedback creates kind of a fun failure environment, and so again reinforces what students may need to study for on the exam. You really want to pair it with specific curriculum content, of course. And this is one that I didn't think about, but it's really true, is you really want your game to be as mobile as possible. So you don't want it to have to only be in one room, because you may not be in that room next year, or you may not have, for example, the projector in the room where you're planning to do it or something like that. So the game really should be as mobile as possible. There should definitely be reflection and debriefing afterwards. Certainly assess it. And then you might as well plan to revise it each year, whether that's with content or with instructions. It's going to need some kind of revision every year. Some pitfalls in games include using games as the only method of teaching the information. It's going to be really important that the student at least has some kind of foundation and baseline in the information before applying it to a game. Too much focus on the technology versus the content. So if, some games can be really cool and really complex, but if the focus is all on the technology and very little on the content, then it's probably not going to be as effective. Again, we kind of talked about high development costs, lengthy development time, balancing difficulty, and then, like I was saying earlier, the controversial nature of rewards. So I can say I personally don't use rewards in games. I feel like students at least when I have been teaching these, they are really excited for something different. They're engaged already and they want to participate. So I have not had to use rewards, but again, it's just going to be important to balance that, selection of the appropriate extrinsic reward and then just kind of gauging your audience as to whether or not you think it's appropriate. So assessment in game-based learning is going to be really important. Typically, you're going to see this in student surveys and questionnaires, say like pre and post, and you'll often see it mentioned in your evaluations from students. There is usually, like I said, a pre-game. Another way to assess this is to compare test scores after game implementation to a previous year, but of course there can be a lot of factors that go into that. So I tend to think that the pre-game and post-game assessments or questionnaires tend to be a little bit more specific than test scores. That's another piece of data you could assess. We need a lot more assessment in game-based learning. So 2013 Cochrane review looked at educational games for healthcare professionals, and they found over 2,000 unique citations, but only 2 randomized controlled trials. And those looked at Family Feud and Snakes and Ladders. And so their conclusion overall was that we just need higher quality research in this area. So in summary, health professions education is the most popular area for learning games. Game-based learning does address educational content in an interactive learning environment. And it benefits the learner across the cognitive and the affective domains by developing our interpersonal, communication, problem-solving skills. It benefits us as teachers through interaction, motivation, and focus. And while there are a ton of types of games, those that I mentioned, those that you guys mentioned, but really the design elements should stay consistent no matter which game you create. And then finally, just creatively design a game of your choice and then make sure to assess it. So with that, are there any questions? Yes.
Do you see any difference when you assign them to create a game as opposed to whenever you have the game and they just get to play it? So I remember when I was younger, when I was an undergrad or back in high school or even middle school, whenever they assigned you to do games and all these things, we're like, oh, you really have to do that for the class. Do you see a difference in their motivation? And their
Good question. Yeah, so I think that there is a difference, and I think students, when they are creating the game, I feel like their peers are a little bit more engaged because they know that they put time and thought into it and things like that. As far as them being motivated to participate in games, I think that they just enjoy it since it's something different than your standard like review, like a review handout for them to do or something like that. It's just a little bit different and more interactive. But I would say the biggest thing would be kind of their support of their peers. They're more willing to, deal with any challenges like within the game or issues within the game because they know their peers created it. Any other questions?
How often do you use games like this? Not like every week or every unit or?
Good question. So certainly not all of my lectures. I don't have a game, but we do. We definitely have a lot of active learning, right, and cases and things like that. So I tend to kind of just include it in, any of those that there's going to be cases. It's just a way for them to answer cases as a group and also be a little bit more interactive. So I would say definitely in my more clinical or disease state focused lectures, because I also teach like over-the-counter stuff, and then also some pharmacokinetics or some math stuff. And so they don't fit as nicely into those. So I would probably say I would do it in a little over half, so probably 60% of my lectures. And then my students have been just like getting them out. I mean, they've been doing great, like on rotations and things like that. So every time when they have a topic discussion, I'm really curious to see what creative thing they can do. Any other questions?
So what do you guys see as barriers in your own area for this? Like, what do you feel like is, Meg was just saying,
so I teach writing, professional technical writing. And I'm thinking that in my field, there aren't that many opportunities. I mean, we don't deal with, content isn't central. And so I was thinking about, for example, Wordles, as a great way to begin summarizing. an article or doing a rhetorical analysis. But my concern is that is the depth of analysis. Yeah, I see you're nodding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've used Wordles to help students write abstracts. It's really
It's a
useful
great
for that.
idea.
But I didn't think of it as a
It's a
game
great idea. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
figuring out like what are the most important.
Yeah. Well, I'm also thinking something like a Jeopardy game where I would, instead of actually writing the game, I would have my students write the questions and the answers. Because I think they would learn a great deal more.
Definitely. And the students talk about how hard it is.
Yes.
You know, or like for the tasking Candyland, it went way longer than he expected. And so he was saying that if he were to do it again, he wouldn't have us move back spaces if we got things wrong. You know, because that just like way added to the game.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, for literature and writing.
Yeah, Strunk and White. You know, I'm thinking basic grammar.
That's an
It's
interesting
not
idea.
necessarily something that students would enjoy learning or would enjoy lectures on.
That's a great idea.
But as teaching writing, it's critical. And so if you can engage your students in learning these things even outside of the classroom and then bring them back to do these games, I'm eager to see how that works.
That's a good idea. Besides, it's almost like content.
Well, it's so critical to the classes I teach, and yet I tend to, it's like the thing that gets squeezed out every single time.
Well, because it's not effective teaching. Direct instruction of grammar is not effective.
Not to a group.
Huh?
Not to a group.
No, right, not to a
But
group.
individually.
Right. Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. And that was going to be one of my questions actually is like, you know, with, because we all teach in different things and things like that. So kind of what would be your best subject for a game that lends itself mostly to a game, and what is your least? So for me, for example, any infectious disease topic really works nicely. It's very algorithm based, so they can certainly pick, you know, based on this disease state, you need to know these several really important things about the condition. So those lend themselves really well. Like I was saying, I think my hardest one is the pharmacokinetics. So, you know, students have to calculate how much of a dose to give based on the patient's blood level. That's not necessarily fun. And also not necessarily looks us up to a game. But what I was thinking is I do a review session. So that could be a potential area for game-based learning would be in the review session, not necessarily where we're practicing and getting them more comfortable with the equations and things like that. So what do you guys think of some of your best and some of your least likely?
I think in psychology, most of them will be easy to implement
Yeah.
because of the content. Maybe research methods will be the most difficult
Mhm.
because they have to create their own studies, analyze their own data. But then when you're summarizing or reviewing main concepts or essential parts of the course, then you might actually use any of them, like Jeopardy, for example, before a test session or something. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any that wouldn't really?
Not really.
Okay.
I think psych is quite flexible.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. I think pharmacy is the same way, except for the math part. But how about you?
Even just review sessions, if you have simple review questions
Mhm.
from what you've shown today, there are many opportunities if you can come up with review questions to gamify. I've never used that verb before. Those questions.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it was interesting because after evolution, I was talking to some people and they were saying, oh, well, how do you make Carmen Sandiego? How do you, or STDiego, how do you make those things? But, and I know this is teaching and technology, but a lot of them can be really low tech. And so you can really, so I use the YouTube intro to Carmen Sandiego, and then I just use slips of paper to have them meet each other and then have them use paper cases. So again, they can be pretty low tech and pretty simple to put together. How about you? What do you think? Any subjects that really lend themselves or don't?
Yeah, I teach nutrition, so
Oh, yeah.
so a lot of those would really,
for example, and I think one of the really easiest low-tech ways to kind of do something, I've used this, is name that whatever. And, you know, you can just include it as a couple of slides in your, you know, your lecture. Like I taught one on diabetes, and name that person with diabetes, and I just had the person's head cut off, and they had to name who, you know, a famous person with diabetes.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's kind of silly. It didn't really teach the concepts, but it kind of introduced the lecture and kind of got them excited and talking.
Yeah.
Kind of an icebreaker more, really.
I agree. Yeah, kind of at the beginning, getting them focused on what you're going to be talking about. Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, I work as a tutor coordinator, and we do individual tutoring, so it's harder about the competition.
Sure.
But I was thinking maybe we could potentially work on developing with our tutors more of like individual competition for them, so the student can look at how they did on these flashcard games or see their score, and then try again the next time they meet. So kind of like maybe even work with tracking sort of a kind of progress through games.
Exactly, how many they get right or how many they get right in a row, depending on what you're tutoring. And
and I know we have a huge amount of science and math, and I think especially the science I've seen a lot of math worksheets where they do those, it's kind of like high school, but you know, those word puzzles where, okay, this is the problem, so you got the answer, now find it on this and put it in to answer a question of some sort. So
definitely.
Well, I think languages lend themselves really well to games. I mean, we kind of play games almost every day anyway. And especially games where you have to communicate something to solve a problem or whatever. And languages have really great free software, like Duolingo. I mean, I assign that outside of class, and they're like little jittery addicts because they need to keep their streak going, or they need to get the next ding. So I think languages are really well suited for this.
I agree. No, I think they definitely are, and that's a really good point. And I think that definitely we should be aware of which apps are available in our field. And I think the tricky thing for me is that there are a lot of drug reference apps or games out there, but how legit and how, you know,
like good information. Yeah,
exactly. But certainly I think we should be aware of which ones are out there. And like, I love playing the Septress one. I have my students play that, you know, and things like that. So I think we can always be aware of which ones we could have our students be playing, you know, if they're smart about that.
I've taught a bunch of different classes, but they're mostly neuroscience or pathophysiology. And so I can see where a lot of games would come in handy, but also there are things like, I would say research methods is a hard one to incorporate, and also gaining information from peer-reviewed literature and applying it to what you're actually trying to study is another thing that's probably not going to fit really well with games.
Right, the interpretation.
Yeah,
absolutely. Does anybody have any ideas for that? How we can interpret an application of literature and games that we can do for that?
Sometimes it's not about, like when I talk to my class, sometimes you can think of it in a way that's not just about finding a way to use a game to teach a concept, but thinking of it in a way of how can I give my students, how can I gamify the concept? And what I mean by that is instead of trying to find a game that might teach that, finding a way to present the material in a way that gives them options, gives them ways to do things, you know, the game elements, right? What makes it fun partly is, or engaging, is that you get to learn, you get to try over and over again, you get to kind of choose paths, and those are the kind of things that make games engaging partly. So can you take your curriculum for a thing and make that in itself more, not a game exactly, but more, give them options to redo, give them options to have choices. You know, if you have an assignment and you're like, you always make it a paper, but this time you say maybe you have 5 options, or 3 options, or 2 options. You can do this or you can do this. That in itself is kind of a game idea, right? Allowing them different ways of doing things. And so, you know, sometimes maybe it doesn't fit to find a game or create a game, but maybe you can take the concept and say, well, maybe I could give them different things. They could write a paper, or they could create an Wordle, or they could create a video, or they could, you know, interview somebody, or, you know, these various things, and then that gives them the same, a lot of times they give them the same kind of feelings of A lot of it is about their own control over something, and so you're giving them control over something.
No, I absolutely agree. I think that's a great way to look at it. And I was just, I was thinking, you know, kind of a way, so we do something called journal clubs, and I don't know if you've done this, but where students have to, you know, review an article and pull out and assess it and things like that. And so I'm kind of thinking, like, along the same path, giving them options. So can they pick out all of the strengths of an article or all the weaknesses of an article, and you know, who can find the most?
I never thought of it as very fun or game-like, but yes. It's more like, oh my god, I don't know what they did wrong.
Right.
But this looks like junk. I don't know. Yeah, the journal club, yes.
Sometimes it's how you frame it too.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nothing different from what you're doing. It's just how you frame it, right? Like how you talk about it.
Right, right.
So you're going, this is not a very exciting this thing. But you're going from, hey, we're going to do something really cool today, you know, and you frame it completely different. And, and it changes their whole attitude on that.
I'm just thinking of all the journal clubs I've participated in.
It's a good
It's like a
point about the
necessary.
framing.
Yeah.
Because I mean, right now I'm teaching literature and writing, and what I struggle with is making sure that they're actually reading and that they're thinking critically and that they're discussing and practicing. And so maybe thinking about gamifying like participation credits.
Yeah.
Participation or
Like thoughtful comments,
Exactly.
responses, things like that in class, which I find so much easier online actually.
yeah.
In
Yeah.
online teaching,
Yeah,
like
sure.
in the face-to-face classroom, it's a big challenge.
Yeah.
Even though it's a small class.
That's where you bring in whole everywhere.
Yeah.
And allow them to experience and track that.
Yeah, or just a tick mark on their team or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
no, I mean, there's lots of
I'm
things.
just
Well, that's a good
thinking
idea
about
because I'm
that.
about to lead another journal
Yeah.
club this
Yeah.
coming semester. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually like them.
I do too.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if it's a team thing, then maybe there'd be a sense of making
That's a
shared
great idea. Thank
responsibility.
you.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just sort of thinking like I don't know how to do this in my class because it's not about like I don't really care if they can remember whose name is what.
Right.
You know, that kind
Right.
of thing. But
Right,
And,
right.
and there's so much abstraction.
Right,
on
right.
That really it's about application.
right,
And-
exactly.
How
And are
do
they
you-
trying it? Do you get points for attempt?
Right.
Like that would be
Right.
nice.
So one thing that I was considering doing, and as I'm having to design a new class, is thinking about writing, right? It's writing and peer review, which is really helpful in writing, right?
Yeah.
But you struggle with getting them to do that well. And I actually was thinking about the idea of making it a team game thing. Whereas if I grade the paper, the people with the highest grade ultimately, the team gets points. The whole team gets points for that, as opposed to just being. So right now they exchange each other, and then they kind of grade each other, and they kind of do, well, you did great.
Yeah.
Right? And then I do, and I'm like, they did not do great.
Yeah.
And,
That could work for certain populations. I'm thinking in honors, I don't want to do that. Because they're so grade focused.
yeah, right. But you know, it's the idea that or something like that, right? So that
Yeah.
the duo.
Or there's a score for like
There's a score for
improvement or something.
And I grade them both right now, but it doesn't seem to work that well anyway. Right? I mean, I grade first.
Yeah.
I grade the grade essentially,
Yeah.
but I actually
Yeah.
think maybe the idea of making it kind of like if you guys both come out of this with an A, you get good points for that, more points for that, you know. And there's a team element to it, and so they're a team. And I don't. It's a thought. I haven't done it. I have no idea if that was going to work. I'm like,
But I have the same problem. I gave the assignment after everything was done, exchange and revise. You know, edit the other group's paper, and then they get it back and revise. I had one of the top students in my class missed a key element of the assignment. And I thought, I should have deducted from the group who reviewed hers. But that is part of the game, too. I mean,
It could be,
it's what
right?
you're
I mean, you
talking
could do it.
about.
But you know, the other thing you could do is you could do a Candyland type thing in the peer review, so that you get to advance or you get points or whatever for responding to showing that in some way, demonstrating that you thoughtfully considered all of these various elements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even following directions.
Yeah,
Well, I was actually going to say, I like your idea. If both of them get like an A, they may be able to get extra credit. But I think it's also because a lot of people don't know how to give feedback.
No,
and
and I think
that's
that's
one
true.
of the hardest things is
And that's
because
true.
they think they've been taught for so long to focus on the positives that they forget, okay, how to think critically and how to actually not, you know, just because you're giving this this criticism, it's constructive criticism. This is helping the person, and we have this idea that criticism, it hurts people. And so we're kind of like trying to tiptoe, but I think that's a wonderful idea.
You know, one thing that you could do in your peer review scenario is you could collect a draft and a final,
You could, yeah.
and the documents that show the most improvement, the peer reviewer gets some credit for.
Well,
So
that's
you
a
could
good
do something
idea.
like that.
Yeah.
The danger, I think, of that is that people might start out with really crap. That's it. You know? Deliberately. But not, maybe not as the peer reviewer.
I mean, you know, part of the idea is there is, I mean, not having a group of science peers, your individual science people. So what about the idea that the ultimate grade is one grade? Even if there's 3 assignments, you give them 1 grade. So that if I got an A and this guy got an F, my grade is a C. So I need to help the student get an A.
Wow.
So that I can have A. That's another thought too. I don't like the grade.
I just like having a
Yeah.
flashback to college where I'm like, no.
I know. I like the grade thing, but and my class is based on points, like actual. You have to have this many points to get to the next level points, not like grade points so much.
There could be a
And
way
so
to
you know,
handle
there's
it, though.
there may be ways to do that within that. You know that.
Like extra credit, you know, so that it wouldn't necessarily be the grade itself. but a little bit of extra credit could be a way to handle it.
For like a language composition class, if the other student who might be a little bit
Yeah.
stronger has
Yeah.
to say, no, this is wrong
Right.
because.
Exactly. That,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it
That's
encourages
learning
them
that.
to do that. Yeah,
That's
I
learning
agree.
is that.
Well, that's the way that you're leveling up rather than earning a certain
Right.
grade.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of motivation.
No, and that's why that's something that might work in my class because you're leveling up. It's not my class. The students basically can choose their grade depending upon how much work they can. I mean, they can choose it. They can. So if they did get a C on this thing, they could do 5 other assignments. Right. So it's kind of works differently. So it would work in this scenario. But I don't like which is why I do this. I don't like the extreme focus on the grade.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me
It's very
too.
frustrating.
So do you have any subjects that fit really well with games or did not fit well with games?
Well, in my area, I work in career services, so a lot of stuff I work with is students individually trying to work through this whole process of career preparation. So I think about ways to help them, to help demystify that whole process and to take away some of the fear of failure, because I think if they get rejected from a job in an interview, it's scary, which in reality that's probably a good thing. So I just, most of my students, you know, that I see are working individually on their own self, so they procrastinate, and so I don't know. I keep thinking, how can I make the process less intimidating, demystify it a little bit more, and some way or another have, I don't know, it's a competition with themselves of saying, you know, moving through this process, it's like a class. The more you go and the more you engage in it, the easier it is. And so I try to figure out ways of coming up with something fun.
I think about you know, so many people use like crowdsourced workout schedules and things like that. And this is a very ill-formed partial thought. But I'm thinking about that kind of a model where the students are competing against themselves, but also against each other, but in an essentially an anonymous environment. Or an anonymous context. So they're thinking about, you know, like procrastinating, you know, of setting a goal for themselves and then being able to mark off that goal to, you know, sort of advance through, I don't know. I hate games. I'm so much not a gamer, and yet I also incorporated a lot of game theory in my classes.
Well, I think
Crossword puzzles.
That's a game.
Yeah, no, it's a game. It's interactive games that I don't like.
think about the dating game, and that's really what this whole job searching.
Well, maybe they could do some sort of dating game with their resume and job ad.
You could do a speed dating, like
like what should I actually
dating,
apply for?
or
Like I was thinking of the game board that you had and having them have their own game of life. I don't necessarily like that, but moving through that process of dating a dud, or something, but really that's what it's all about. And the only way to know is is to walk through the process of doing it. So anyway, so the dating game and a game board came to mind of walking through that process.
Yeah. Well, at least it would walk you through like criteria that you need to apply to figure out.
Or could that be sort of a deadline incentive, is that we're going to put on a fake speed dating, and you have to have your CV ready, and you have to be able to present yourself within, you have a 10-minute window to talk to this person. And if you I don't know how many people you're working with, but they could alternate being the hirer versus the hiree, and you could do that kind of thing. And then they have a deadline where I got to at least know who I am to a potential employer.
We've done the speed dating event before with employers being obviously the interviewers, and turns out to not be very speedy. and it turns out that students often won't show up because it's not some kind of a required, or not some sort of a getting extra credit type thing, because I'm not in control academic wise to make sure that happens. Anyway. So it has to be, it's not the easy button. That's the other thing. I think about just getting an easy button and saying, okay, here, bam, there you go. It's all a piece of cake, But
I'm kind of thinking, too, if there's a way to create a resource that's like, because I'm sure you've read hundreds and thousands of CVs, but, can they pick out what's wrong with this CV?
Right.
And how many of those can they do in a round? Or a treasure hunt, or like doing interviews. And how many mistakes can they find in these people on YouTube I'm sure there's bad interviews on YouTube and good ones, and and good tell me about yourself questions and all of those. So those might be options.
So that's a good idea.
Those are
mistakes on the resumes kind of thing of their own. So in a class, if I do go to a class, I'll take packets of resumes and have them be the interviewer and screen the candidates, and they only have 5 minutes, and then I have them do it a second time and then drop it down to like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
That I think works a lot. Works well, but little things like that, the interactive, but I like the mistakes on resumes and just handing them out and say,
And I think if you
just things like that.
Yeah, to have a resource that they could even do potentially like in their own home, like you're saying, they might be, not willing to come out to the speed dating events, but something that they could do on their own time. And when they do get nervous about a job interview, they can review those. And then did you choose
What has you've gotten? I'm stuck on Candyland and Strong Film White. Actually do, and maybe in parallel, but do your rubric as Candyland. The things that you step through from the beginning of the course to the end of the course.
Yeah.
And on Strong and White, I think this could potentially apply to the resumes, omit needless words, omit needless words, omit needless words. And so you could get students working together to see how,
So I'm thinking about that kind of thing too, Siobhan, and I'm thinking about, because we do a lot of that, right? Yeah. We do a lot of that. I do a lot of, having students pitch ideas and other students vote or decide what they, we do all that. Yeah. But the question is does the wrapping it in, packaging it like a game change the experience? And so I'm thinking about things like errors, right? And having groups of students working with documents, finding all the errors or editing a document. And then does the first group win? And if the group that finds the most errors win? Or, if the first group wins, then what's the incentive for anybody else to finish, right? But, so I think we all do. So, Christy says all the time, and she's right, school's a game. Education's a game, right? We all do all kinds of things that are gaming.
Just badly designed.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that's a good point. We can do a lot that, we all talk about active learning all the time, but these are all just kind of forms of that. Like you said, packaging it a little bit differently and having that competitive side to it.
Well, and plus, I think too, what you were saying, one of the things you said on there is that by packaging it in the game, it's less threatening.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, and so there's an interesting idea too, is that, you know, with the original idea that I had of having them pair up and do that, what if you did it anonymously?
Yeah.
You know, what if you gave, here's
Numbers.
of papers, and you give them out randomly, they don't know whose paper they are, and whoever comes up, you know, whoever makes the best papers out of that. It's an interesting idea too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that goes with it.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
A little bit unrelated to that.
Yeah.
You collect data with your games, right? Whenever you implement them. You usually go to IRB and all these things?
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm. So I have an IRB for pre and post on my rotation students. And then most of, so, you know, it's been within the last couple of years that I've really started ramping up the games like the STD Go and things like that. And so with those, again, like you said, I'll be doing IRB with surveys and things like that.
Is it pretty
Just
smooth here in UW, or
I'm sorry?
is it pretty smooth here? Or
Oh, yeah.
Okay. No
Yeah.
problem so far?
Mhm.
Okay.
No, I mean, I usually just cite some of the evidence that I talked about here about how you can see pre and post differences in assessment. And I usually don't focus on test scores, again, just because I think that's kind of non-specific. I mean, we see such huge differences from one year to the other, unrelated typically to the type of learning. So I mostly focus on pre and post assessment surveys. They're pretty quick. And you'll probably, like I said, see it in your evaluations too. I get some random game comments. So, and then, do you have a question or comment?
One of the things that I have found is how different classes or groups react to the same game. One year it's wonderful, the next they're just sitting there. So how have you addressed that? Or have you had that problem?
Yeah, so no, I agree, and I think some definitely are going to go over better than others, so I think it does depend on the group, but I think you can kind of see or kind of assess how the game is going and kind of know if it's maybe time to change groups, so like if they're working in one group, maybe they would work better in a different group, or if it's time to just cut the game short, that's an option as well, and then give them resources they can study independently. But you're right, I mean, I think that's one of the important things, I'm glad you brought that up, is kind of monitoring the game as it's going to kind of get that immediate feedback in addition to whatever they're going to tell you about it afterwards. So yeah, those are probably my best advice would be, if possible, switching up the groups, and then sometimes I've cut like Family Feud short or cut catchphrase short just because I can tell, like, for example, if I do it after rounds, I round with the family medicine team in the hospital every day. And so after rounds, if they're like burnt out or they're focused on their patients that they have in clinic that afternoon, then, we'll just cut it short. But you're right, monitoring is super important.
So I have a related question then. Do you have a specific methodology for putting for grouping? Or do you let students do that randomly? How do you set up the groups?
Great question. So I would say randomly is how it's been done for the Find Each Other games, because that's just going to be the nature of it. So I literally walk around and I have a folder or a bag full of these one-liner descriptions, and then they have to go find each other. So that's very random. For things like Family Feud and catchphrase, I do try to strategize that one, the small groups, mostly because a lot of that I'm doing is interprofessional education. So I don't want to, for example, pit my pharmacy students against my practicing doctors, because I think that would be very different. And so definitely have more strategy with those. But then as far as the other ones, like, for example, Survivor Sepsis or those kind of games, I let it be where the students are sitting in those large lecture settings, just because I feel like it's a little bit more difficult for them to find a different group unless they have something like the slips of paper. That's kind of how I do it. Maybe that's what's better. My strategies. Yes.
Are there any games that work better than others in terms of performance? Are there any games that, I mean, obviously the game you pick depends on what you're teaching, the class, the context, the type of students you have. Or are there any games that are kind of popular in terms of giving you good performance overall in the literature?
Sure. So good question. I mean, I think, unfortunately, the literature, a lot of it is just kind of case reporting on what people are saying. I would say my best success in games has been those that are in person. So, for example, like the crossword puzzles, I think those are great for something like an online course. I think my challenge with those is that it would require students to do it kind of on their own time, more than likely. I mean, we could do it in class, but I think more than likely it's be on their own time. And then those in which I have a follow-up written resource for them. So for example, like I said, a lot of my Find Each Other games are based on patient cases. So in addition to the game itself, I also want to have that supplemental reference that they can look at afterwards that kind of reinforces those concepts. So those would be the most successful. I've only seen the card games published once, so I don't know how successful that one is. But the Find Each Other ones seem to be really popular. And then I think the challenge with board games would just be that it's probably going to be a smaller group unless you can really make it mobile. So for Candyland, for example, he just had it on the whiteboard and we just went along our spaces. But I think it would be harder to create, say, a bunch of board games for a class unless you're having the students create it themselves.
So I usually stick to Jeopardy because I have control of the questions. And I'm usually very strict on the testing effect and retrieval-based practice, reflection-type questions.
Absolutely.
So that's what I mean. Some games, they might be really fun.
Sure.
They might offer very swallow type of processing. They might not be very conducive to enduring learning per se. So I was just wondering if there's something about that somewhere.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me are just those that I have the supplemental reference with, because a lot of them after, say like, so you bring up a great point. So catchphrase, really fun. And they have to, I think it requires them to do that recall and previous experiences, while they're trying to, and communication and trying to get their group to guess. But there's not a lot I could send them afterwards except a list of words. So that one probably not as long for the enduring learning. It's more like the in-person. So for the ones that you're talking about, probably those like the cases and things like that I can send out that have the longer answers. Does that make sense?
Yep. Perfect sense. Thank you.
Well, the last thing I was just going to show you guys is I came up with, in case you were doing catchphrase, how you would do catchphrase for this lecture. Has anybody included catchphrase? All right. Well, so what I would do is, and this is just an example of kind of design elements of a game. What I do in catchphrase is it's usually after we've reviewed some kind of concept. So, for obesity management catchphrase, we just reviewed the obesity management guideline. I did laxative catchphrase on rounds. We just reviewed all the classes of laxatives. And so then we divide the group up, and I give them specific instructions on how to pass the buzzer, who to pass it to, which words they can and cannot say. So again, those really clear, direct instructions. Then they have these words, and they're in a stack, and so they pull them, and they have to get their team members to guess these words and then pass the buzzer. And then once the buzzer goes off, I take that opportunity to talk about the words that have been discussed before we move on to the next group, so that we can really review those pertinent words and how they relate to what we were talking about. Because, for example, in this one, you could get people to guess Jeopardy in a lot of different ways. But again, I would probably say that this is the most common one that people use, and things like that. So then afterwards, debriefing, reflection, talking about how it went, and then maybe the next year, if there was one that was really hard or some words that were really easy, and modifying it based on feedback. So that's how I would do a catchphrase game about this time. But thank you so much for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm in the College of Health Sciences, the School of Pharmacy. Yeah, I really appreciate all the great discussion. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I just find it really hard to start a class.